Coming up, the producer and director of the new movie musical, Stand, which premieres in the United States in less than 2 weeks. Plus, new training available from IAM Crest. Activate Live starts now.
Activate your voice! Activa tu voz! Activate it now!
Speak up, speak out.
Get involved, get involved.
Engage-toi.
Take action!
Aktiviere deine Stimme.
We're union and we're proud.
Welcome to Activate Live. This is a special edition. I'm Tanya Hutchins with the Machinists Union. We have a preview for you of a new movie that shows the importance of organizing and standing up for your rights. It's called Stand and is set during the Winnipeg General Strike of 1919. More than 100 years later, that strike makes it to the big screen, and you can be a part of the U.S. premiere on December 1st. Joining us now is producer, writer, and composer Danny Schur. Danny, we thank you for taking the time to join us.
Absolutely, Tanya. Thrilled to be here.
Danny, first tell us, how did this movie come about?
Well, way back when, in 2003, I was going to be writing my third musical. What was then a really obscure event where I am. I'm in Winnipeg, Canada, the 1919 Winnipeg General Strike. I knew it was dramatic. I knew it'd be the subject of, or a good subject for a stage musical. Wrote it, knew nothing like I know now about labor history, had no idea until I got into the research just how much it may as well be ripped from today's headlines. And at that first run, none other than Jeff Goldblum was sitting beside me because he was in a relationship with the lead female actress of the stage show. And he said, big story, big ideas, it would make a great movie. And I thought, wow, if Jeff Goldblum thinks it'll make a great movie, I should act on it. And who knew, it took like 14 or 15 years, but we got it to stage, got it to the screen.
Now, there have only been a few movies with labor themes since Norma Rae had mainstream success in 1979. I remember watching that movie. What was it like working with a union theme in 2020?
Well, in some ways, it was a breath of fresh air because we garnered the support of the whole union movement all across North America, including IAM. In some ways, because it is a musical, it was the weirdest thing ever. There was so many of our conversations in the offices of some of the national affiliates where the look was, we'll let these guys in the office. But everyone got the idea. We were trying to make the new Norma Rae, but married with the kind of hipness that Hamilton has. And we said we were making this movie for the next generation of activists, both to remind people of history, but also to show how what's going on right now is so similar to the past. So you can learn from the past and take it forward.
Give us a really brief synopsis of what the movie is about.
Really briefly, it's a Romeo and Juliet love story between a Catholic guy who's immigrated from Ukraine and a fellow Ukrainian female Jewish woman who's a suffragette. And that, with a background of all of the tumult that's going on in the whole world, general strikes in Seattle and Winnipeg, all the racial stuff that's going in 1919. So it is a love story set against a tumultuous social background.
Now, what is your favorite scene, and can you set it up for us?
Well, okay, I have to divide it into my favorite non-musical scene and favorite musical scene. So there's this great villain based on a real life guy, A.J. Anderson. And you know, what makes a great villain is that they absolutely believe in the righteousness of their cause. And to a large extent, we just lifted his dialogue from a whole bunch of historical records. And, even by 1919 standards, he was pretty villainous. He completely convinced the Canadian government that they should just listen to him. He was going to prosecute all of these legally striking union people. So when you see this clip, you'll see the actor Paul Ossiamber just kind of nonchalantly playing this really dastardly approach that he's doing. So it's just a great villain scene. And do you want me to set up the musical scene now, or should we wait for that one till we see
Let's
it?
wait for that one and take a look at this villain clip.
If we all hold as one, they haven't a hope. We'll starve them back to work. We will protect this city from the criminals behind this strike. Immigrants, foreigners, Bolsheviks. The alien enemy we just fought a war against.
Is that true?
Would you rather have the public on our side?
Of course I would.
Then of course it's true. And that's what's going in the newspaper.
The paper's on strike, in case you didn't notice.
Even better, we get to publish our own. From now on, everything I say is true. I am the public face of the Citizens Committee. You back me up on every word I say, every decision I make, and I will have every worker begging to come back at the same wage they walked out on, or less.
We're gonna need the feds behind us on this.
Leave it to me. All of it.
How long will it take?
As long as necessary. I give them a week.
Now that scene made me so mad. Did you have the same reaction? And I'm sure you expected it to make people mad.
For sure. What I find funny is our director, Robert Adetuyi, who will be here in a second. When we first started talking about the script, he specifically referenced that scene, and he was like, "Did you write that yesterday?" When it had been written a decade ago. And so I always think about people coming to us and saying, well, you clearly wrote that to be anti-Trumpian, when it's just lifted from history and an example of how history repeats itself over and over.
Now we have another clip, and this is the musical scene, a singing scene where the maids are walking out. Can you set that up a little bit?
So imagine in 1919, people are starving all across the world, and these non-unionized maids who are black and who have just a tremendous amount to lose by joining this general strike that's enveloping the whole city. They get the guts to do this. And in this song, the very great Lisa Bell, our breakout star from Winnipeg, Canada, who's just like a Whitney Houston in vocal potential, sings this song. And I tell you, every time I hear it, it just gives me chills and the hair goes up on my arms hearing Lisa sing this song, because you can just imagine the stakes are so high, and yet they decide to make a stand.
All right, here it is.
I lend the hand I deserve. So now I'm gonna stand on the strength of those shoulders, of those who stand up and never back down. These hands have the strength to move boulders. I've drawn my line in the sand, and this is where I stand. I've drawn my line in the sand, and this is where I stand.
Powerful scene of such empowerment. What has the feedback been like so far on this movie?
Well, It's always a variation of the following. People are deeply moved. Like we did a screening just half a block from the White House in D.C., and people were coming back, and mascara was leaking. So obviously that's a great thing when people react to it like that. But for me as a writer, I often quote this reaction. It's usually kind of a disgruntled old white guy that comes up to me and says, you know, I got nothing good to say about unions, and I certainly do not like musicals or movie musicals. And damn it, you changed my mind about both. So it just goes to show you the power of art, but the power of music too, because as you saw with Lisa singing that song, there's just a certain power to music that is an awesome thing when it's unleashed.
Well, we can't wait for the debut in 2 weeks in the United States at theaters across the country. How can union locals and state federations or labor councils participate in that December 1st premiere if they'd like to see it as a group?
Well, we certainly recognize that we could not have had a worse time. The COVID numbers are not great. So we're not actively saying go in big groups. But the theaters are open in certain jurisdictions. They're subject to very restricted seating. So for those for whom it's safe to do so, you can gather in a very socially distanced, deep cleaned, mask wearing theater and be, 20 people in a theater that would normally sit 300. This movie is really well enjoyed on the big screen. So all people need to do is follow the website, and you can buy individual tickets via the website. Search the theater near you that's playing. It's playing in some 400 theaters across the land, and do that. But we certainly don't encourage anyone doing anything that they would be uncomfortable with or would make for a dangerous situation.
Well, let's hope that the COVID numbers go down, and we appreciate that there will be physically distanced seats for those that do decide to go to the theater. Anything else you'd like to mention, Danny?
This is just the premiere. It's just a preview. Because of COVID, we'll be unveiling this for a long, long time. We were just today talking about the eventual other theatrical releases. We don't know when they'll be. They'll be after COVID, of course. So this is just really the tip of the iceberg. And I appreciate so much the help in advising everyone that's part of it. I am.
Well, thank you so much for the inside scoop.
Oh, you bet. Thanks.
That was Danny Schur, producer, writer, and composer of Stand. And don't go away, we have the director of Stand coming up next. In the meantime, you can join the conversation, as many of you have already, on Facebook and Twitter, especially if you're one of our Canadian members who has seen the movie. Let us know what you think. And I already see a comment from Zita Hildebrandt, who said that she thoroughly enjoyed this movie, a must-see, and Zita joins us from Canada. Deborah Jones also says, awesome movie. So we're getting good reviews from IAM members. Well, right now, joining us is the director of Stand, Robert Adetuyi. Thank you so much for being here, Rob.
Hi, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, first off, you grew up in a union town. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Small mining town, mind you, a very big mine in a small town in northern Ontario called Sudbury. And it was really interesting because growing up in a town that is very unionized because it's kind of a one industry town, we in 1979 had the largest or longest running strike, at least at that point. It was almost a year-long strike. And as you can imagine, when I'd read this screenplay about this general strike, I so connected to it because in my town, see my dad out there on the picket lines and the struggles that we all faced for over a year with no income. The union support was really what kept us going, as I recall that time period. It was really something. So, growing up in a mining town and a union town, coming to a movie like Strike was kind of or Stand was a natural combination.
Well, you mentioned Strike. That was the stage musical
That's
before
right.
the film, correct? Well, how do you connect material that's set in 1919 in this contemporary world?
Well, it's a good question because, and also, being a musical, it's 1919. You're thinking, costuming, period piece. But the story, of course, the love story is universal. It's now, that Romeo and Juliet complexity of these two people, but also the issues that they were confronted with in 1919 is so relevant to what's going on today. So in that sense, it wasn't so much difficult to make the connection as how do you, tell a musical of such a dramatic event as a big general strike so that an audience today can go there. And I heard Danny, our writer, producer, talking earlier about the fact that when I read the script, I thought they had just written it because it just was so on point to what's going on now. And they'd written it 15 years ago. And the story, of course, takes place, 100 years ago. But I guess because history repeats itself, it wasn't as difficult a challenge because of the fact that this story really, minus the costuming, you would say it was today.
Well, I was going to ask you about the challenges of any of directing a period piece. What is that like, trying to make sure that it really looks like 1919?
Well, those are difficult challenges, and in some ways, they're bigger challenges for our production designer, who was fantastic, and our costumer. They were both fantastic people who worked really hard, and you're always working on a budget, so there's that aspect. But also, like my cinematographer Roy was a phenomenal cinematographer, and so we were able to capture. Again, with budget limitations, the real sense of that time period and the way you frame your shots and the lighting really bring it to life. And Winnipeg happens to be a city that has an old district where the buildings look just as original, like from 1919. So for us, it was a production designer's dream. But it's hard. I mean, to recreate the sense of place, because they lived in poverty back then. We're talking about the workers, our main characters, and creating these alleyways and streets that they lived on. That was a challenge, but it's also the fun of it. I mean, that's why you love coming and doing a period movie.
Now let's talk about representation. How important was it to have a diverse set of characters in this movie? Because I understand it was quite different from what the stage musical was like.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting, and my hat's off to Danny, who not only wrote the movie with his partner Rick, but produced it. They brought me the script, and at that point, the script, there was no people of color. It was an all-white script. And I often talk about, ever since Oscar So White, they say that, if you put someone of color behind the camera, it can, affect what's happening in front of the camera. So when they gave me a shot to direct this movie, because usually when a script comes to me, it predominantly has a black cast. It's typical, in Hollywood. So this comes to me, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. But knowing the history of that time period, I thought, you know what? It would be really nice if we could dig a little deeper. And an expression I gave to Danny was, let's widen the lens. Because back in the day, they really focused, when you see pictures, it's always of the sort of the white elite class. But it just outside of that frame, you would see people of color, indigenous people, who were all contributing in a part of the struggles in the fight of the day. So we agreed that we would go down that road, and we discovered the character of Emma Jones, who is this African-American who had come from Oklahoma, where they were having all that racial rioting, and there was the lynchings going on. And she and her family, like many other blacks at the time, came up to Winnipeg. So we thought, let's include her, and that became Lisa Bell's character, who you saw earlier singing Stand. And the same thing, we have Gabriel Daniels, who plays an indigenous Métis who served in World War I and comes back after the war. And, originally it was cast as an Irish Canadian, and Danny and Rick agreed, let's make this someone indigenous. And it just opens up the movie. It really shows you the complexity of our culture and our society, and that the struggle was amongst all of us. We were all in it together. It wasn't just a Ukrainian struggle or a British struggle. It was blacks, indigenous, women, all together. So I think that for me, that fundamentally changes the vibe of the film, that you realize you relate to it today, because that is, we're looking at the race struggles right now, Black Lives Matter, all of these things that are going on. they were going on in 1919.
It's incredible how things stay the same.
Yeah.
We talked about Danny's favorite scenes. What was your favorite scene?
Well, it's interesting because often I think as a director, you sort of want to, you think about an achievement like, oh, it was a big, complicated scene, but really for me in this movie, I mean, I love all the scenes, and so it's always hard to choose, what's your favorite child type of thing. But there's a more intimate scene between the father and son. That's Mike Sokolowski and his son Stefan, played by Greg Henry and Marshall Williams. And it's where finally they have this confrontation. And it was the power of the actors. It wasn't anything I was doing with the camera, although, the camera's there, the lighting is really beautiful, but it was the way these two actors took on this moment. And I feel it's so universal, this struggle between fathers and sons, a son trying to, find his way and have his voice. He's in love with this young woman that the father is opposed to. And something magical happened. It is there in the page, but Greg Henry is a phenomenal actor, and Marshall, a young actor who really had to step up to play opposite him. Something magical happened. It was very powerful. I remember after the first take, I had a tear in my eye. Maybe I also related to, my own father-son, with my dad, who was an immigrant, and having gone through those sort of same struggles. So it's a very powerful scene. There are many, but that's one that I hope when audiences see it, I think they'll feel it.
That's a good one. It was a great movie. I loved watching the screening, so I think that'll come through for everyone. Before we leave, anything else you want to mention to all of the workers, especially union members watching right now?
Well, as I say, I grew up in a union town, and this movie is very personal to me. I think it helps remind everybody who's in the union why it's so important and what the union is doing for you behind the scenes and uniting us. But for people who are outside of the union, this movie is also really important because sometimes we forget all the things that we have. I'm talking about people who aren't in a union job, but they have all these rights. And this movie really depicts that struggle that got us those rights today. And so I hope that they'll come out and support it. And, as Danny said, it's going to have a long and odd kind of rollout because of COVID. But it's I think, a very important movie. I'm very proud to be a part of.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you having me here today.
That was Robert Adetuyi, the director of the movie musical Stand. Now, the premiere is Tuesday, December 1st in almost every state. For more information about group tickets or individual tickets, you can visit the website that you see there, stand-movie.com. That's stand-movie.com. And you can even suggest the event to your local lodge president or state federation. Before we leave, we'd like to tell you about an upcoming training from IAM Crest. Now, Crest will hold a series of free trainings via Zoom over the next 2 months. The first is a COVID-19 safety awareness training on Monday, November 23rd from 1 p.m. to 2:30 Eastern Time. Now, that's 10 a.m. on the West Coast. It's the first of a short series of trainings covering the pandemic and is available to all members on a first-come, first-served basis. The second part of the series takes place December 11th at the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, and will focus on mental health awareness. The third and final training will be the Dislocated Workers Program on January 19th, and it'll be offered to members who are experiencing a layoff or a furlough. Spots are limited, so sign up by emailing SANDH, that's SANDH, at iamaw.org. And be sure to include your name, district, local lodge, and email address for all those registering. Remember, the first training is coming up this Monday, November 23rd at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. And before we go, we'd like to congratulate the Milwaukee Art Museum employees who voted to join the Machinists Union, along with the Seneca Foods in New York. So thank you so much. Kudos to you for voting to join the IAM. That's all we have for this special edition of Activate Live. Keep checking your email for iMail updates on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Stay healthy and stay safe.